of the country. It's the first impeachment scenario in the country started in-house, not with outside counsel.
South Carolina GOP Senator Lindsey Graham on Fox's Sunday Morning Futures. The FBI confirming Sunday that it's operating on the assumption that last week's attack at a naval air station in Florida was an act of terrorism. 3 people were killed in the attack by a Saudi national training at the base. He was later killed by law enforcement. Iran's president saying a new proposed budget will help the country survive U.S. trade embargoes as widespread unrest continues.
In an interview with Fox News' Brett Baird this weekend, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper discussed the ongoing protests in Iran.
Given what's happening in the streets of Iran these days, you see a regime under stress. It's a good thing that the Iranian people are also seeking the prosperity, the liberty, the freedoms that we enjoy in this country. That's something that we believe is, as I talked about, promoting American values abroad.
The U.S. State Department believes more than 1,000 people were killed in the protests that were unable to be widely covered due to the internet being taken down.
And that report from Fox's Trey Yingst, U.S. sanctions are blocking Iran from selling crude oil abroad on world markets. At least one person now confirmed dead after a volcano erupts on a small New Zealand island. About 100 tourists were on or near White Island when that volcano erupted, and some are missing. America is listening to Fox News.
Did you know that home loan rates have plunged again? Would you like to take advantage of these lower rates to help lower your monthly payments? Refinancing doesn't have to be for another 30 years. It can be for 10, 15, or 20 years. It's up to you. Reduce your monthly payments. Pay off your loan earlier. At Bank Pacific, where we're open to closing your loan in a hurry.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender. Credit conditions apply.
Attention federal employees and annuitants. Enjoy free health screenings and learn more about Take Care's 2020 health plan offerings during open season at the Micronesia Mall every Saturday through December 9th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Join us for raffle prizes and a variety of health fair activities, including massage demos, health screenings, on-site gym partners, Medicare info, health risk assessments, and much, much more. We hope to see you there. To learn more, visit TakeCareAsia.com. Take Care, the first reaccredited health plan in the region.
A slight drop at the gas pump in the past 2 weeks. A gallon of regular grade dipping 1 cent to $2.65.
The holiday itself is not the impact. Rather, it is the fact that this is our low demand season, and it would take a crash in crude oil prices to cause a substantial decline at the pump.
That's analyst Troby Lundberg, who publishes the Lundberg survey. The cheapest gas, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, $2.10 a gallon. The highest price, San Francisco, $3.89. Well, the next Democratic White House debate coming up December 19th. Some candidates still haven't qualified. Not happy about that is New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, who still does not have the numbers.
We're doing like a lot of candidates have done in the past that were discounted by national media and press. We're running our campaign, and we're having a great result. And I've been so grateful to the American people because folks are going to CoryBooker.com and making contributions to our campaign, helping us to overcome a lot of these artificial barriers. So this has been one of the best trips that Iowa have had. Our crowds are getting so big, we're having overflow rooms.
Senator Booker on ABC's This Week. Another big weekend for a Disney sequel.
I'm going with you. Anna? No.
Disney's Frozen #2 not budging from its #1 reign at the box office, taking in $34.7 million in ticket sales, according to estimates. So far, it's grossed nearly $1 billion worldwide in just 3 weeks.
When people get desperate, the knives come out.
Bringing up #2, the acclaimed whodunit Knives Out, grossing $14.2 million, followed by a tie between the Ford versus Ferrari and Queen and Slim, both bringing in $6.5 million. And at #5, Marielle Heller's Mr. Rogers drama, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, grossing $5.2 million.
That's Fox's, that update rather from Fox's Jessica Stone. Ted Simmons, Marvin Miller elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. I'm Paul Stevens. This is Fox News.
Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro brings you island hospitality with a true taste of modern Chamorro cuisine. A bistro look that feels like home. Their menu features local and traditional flavors with a twist. From their famous Kelaguen Hapa to fresh ahi poke salad and their award-winning barbecue ribs. Mescla takes your favorite local dishes and serves them with extra flair that you'll only find at Mescla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Stop by their newest location in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon. For reservations, call 969-2652. Mescla, a true taste of Guam.
Want to grow your business? Start a new venture? Or stay ahead of the competition? You can. With Docomo Pacific Smart Business Solutions tailored to your specific needs and ambitions, you can do it all. Partner with a network with best-in-class network coverage, state-of-the-art communication platforms, and a team dedicated to providing you with premium support. Call 688-2677 to start your journey to success today. Docomo Pacific Business, delivering your future today.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. As I sit here and repeat that again for the umpteenth hundred time, I know that thousands of people out there in my international radio listening audience understand the Second Amendment and its importance to our constitutional democracy. Unfortunately, there are a few folks out there in the USA that haven't gotten the word yet. And it's kind of disappointing to know that a lot of them are enrolled in what used to be called institutions of higher learning. Colleges and universities. Judging from the things that go on and behind those ivy-covered walls anymore, I'm not so sure that anyone learns much of anything that's worth learning. There's perhaps the necessity for an awful unlearning to be done. I heard Ray this morning talking about the possibility of sending his daughter to Berkeley. And Ray did not take kindly to that idea, and I can understand it. It seems that the big-name universities in our country have turned into factories to turn out the ultra-lefties over there in the neo-Marxist fringe that hate America, hate Americans, hate each other, hate just about whatever you want to name, and at the same time would accuse people who are not haters of being haters. So I've got a little squib on the Second Amendment here dealing with Georgetown University in the District of Columbia. At one time had a pretty good reputation. Nowadays, I'm not so sure. But the title of the article, and it runs in bearingarms.com with Tom Knighton, Georgetown students need lesson in Constitution. Georgetown University is supposedly one of the better colleges in this country. It's one of those schools that get mentioned in someone's resume as if it's supposed to mean something to the rest of us, kind of like Harvard or Yale. As such, one who hasn't been paying attention to the state of the American university would think that such schools would require the I word, intelligence. However, when a group of students from this supposedly prestigious school is protesting for gun control outside the Supreme Court, So here's a quote. Students from Georgetown chapter of March for Our Lives, MOL, joined hundreds of demonstrators outside the Supreme Court to advocate for gun control reform December 2nd. MFOL-GU partnered with other gun control advocacy groups at the rally Monday, including Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America and the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. I suspect that there were very few members of our international radio listening audience in that crowd on December 2nd. The lawsuit pushed the Supreme Court by the National Rifle Association represents a desperate effort to prevent gun control legislation. Now, that's the case that we've been talking about here in Tall Tales, the one where New York had a law that said you could only take your gun from your home to a firing range in the city of New York. It made its way to the Supreme Court, and then the state of New York changed the law, trying to moot out the case. Remember that one? Well, this is a quote from a student at Georgetown who's the co-chair of MFOL. And he says, and the lawsuit pushed to the Supreme Court by the NRA represents a desperate effort to prevent gun control legislation, according to Chris Stauffer, who's in the class of 22. The NRA knows that it can no longer beat the gun violence prevention movement at the ballot box. Just look at the 2018 midterm elections. So it has turned to the courts as a last-ditch effort to protect the interests of the gun lobby. Stauffer wrote in an email to the campus newspaper called The Hoya. The rally Monday displayed solidarity among youth activists as they pushed for reform, Stauffer wrote. It was important for students to rally today to show the courts and our country that we are demanding change, and we will not stop until that happens. So back to the article. It seems to me that Stauffer and his pals need a lesson on the Constitution as well as what the Supreme Court looks at regarding the laws of this land. The court isn't meant to be swayed by activists outside its walls. It's not meant to be pushed one way or the other by the winds of public opinion. The Supreme Court is to decide cases based on its interpretation of the Constitution and amendments. That's why justices are appointed to life terms. Once they're on the bench, they don't leave unless they either want to or leave or die. That way they don't have to pay attention to public opinion. They don't have to give a damn what a bunch of kids from Georgetown have to say about anything. An important point, life tenure. So once a person is appointed to the Supreme Court and confirmed, he doesn't come up for election. He's not subject to the vicissitudes and passions of the mob, which is something that those who have studied democracy oftentimes warn against. So the Supreme Court, in a sense, acts like a brake, keeps us from going too fast, etc. But, of course, the young uber leftists on campus would like to take away our guns, abortion on demand, and Virginia, D.C. is very close to Virginia, abortion on demand, maybe a little infanticide thrown in, marry just about anyone or as many people as you want, or engage in some kind of a legal union and call it marriage, all that stuff. So it's not surprising that they would be opposed in favor of gun control and against the Second Amendment. All the more reason for me to keep pounding on it every day. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, so that's the that's the Second Amendment for today. So from there we go straight to... Zemi Ichotny, our backwards bilingual play on words, meaning meet the press. It's my time to give the newspaper editors a little bit of what for when they screw up, or when they don't. When I want to point out that they're not living up to their duties in our community. I also will find one of the two as a usual principle, and find that I could use my blue pencil to give that editorial the coveted blue star. And as you well know, editorial careers rise and fall on the number of blue stars a newspaper can get. It's not the Pulitzer Prize. That's pretty close, though. So I always start with the daily news, and it usually takes me about 2 seconds to get through the daily news because they don't write about anything that we care about here in Guam. But they copy from others. Today, they ran something from the USA Today editorial board instead of writing a real editorial. And boy, they really touched a nerve here with the folks that live on Guam. Here's the title: Farmers' Burden. Policies boomerang on American farmers. So, you know, it's not that we live in a vacuum and we don't care about what happens to farmers in America. We all know the importance of raising foodstuffs, et cetera, et cetera. But you can get this kind of news online in a multitude of places. What we're looking for is an editorial that speaks to what's going on right here in our little corner of the world, with something like an authoritative voice, some facts, some theories that make sense, some praise, or preferably some criticism of what needs to be criticized, and some direction as to where we ought to go. The Daily News seldom is able to thread that journalistic needle. So far, the score is 156 Daily News editorials have received the Blue Star, 55 Daily News editorials, and a newcomer to the game, Candid News, has already received 2 Blue Stars. So I think in the last month, Candid News has beaten the Daily News 2-0. And the Daily News stars go back quite a ways. Probably most of the 55 were attained a year or so ago. So I don't know why the drought of editorials at the Daily News. But I can tell you this, guys, you're not doing yourself any favors. The Post is beating you 3 ways to Sunday when it comes to putting out a daily newspaper. Okay, then we have the Post for today. And this sounds like it's going to be a real softball editorial, but it's not. The title, Not Neighborly and Not Nice. Now, of course, we know that in the woke years of the 21st century, being nice and being sensitive to feelings is about the most important thing that they can do. Because if they want to live the right kind of life, they shouldn't concern themselves with facts, pragmatism, morals, etc. It's about how they feel that's really important. But this editorial doesn't succumb to that form of being woke. Here it goes. On Saturday night, the Singapore media broke the news to the world that Guam will be the 3rd United States jurisdiction to host a detachment of Singaporean Air Force personnel and aircraft that need room for, quote, permanent fighter training. Singapore's Straits Times was among the first to report that Singapore's Air Force will use Anderson Air Force Base and the skies around Guam for fighter training. Hours later, U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper formally announced on the Pentagon's website that he and Singapore Minister for Defense Ng Eng Hen, I'll spell that, N-G-E-N-G-H-E-N, Ng Eng Hen. Can you repeat that for me, Real Joe Cruz?
Inging.
Yeah, it's probably better than Ingingen. Yeah, right. All right, so Ingingen met Friday. He and Mark Esper met Friday on the sidelines of the Reagan National Defense Forum in California. In that meeting, Esper announced both sides had signed a, quote, non-binding memorandum of understanding establishing a Singapore Air Force permanent fighter training detachment on Guam. Singapore has a training detachment in Idaho as well in Queensland and one in Bordeaux, France, the Straits reported. That's the Straits Times. That's the #1 newspaper in Malaya, Singapore. It would have been nice if the U.S. military had given Guam a timelier courtesy heads up that this was coming down. If Singapore's public was given an early notice, it doesn't look well on the part of the U.S. military and its civilian talking heads on Guam to neglect letting Guam residents know ahead of time. Many on Guam appreciate the military's role and presence on Guam, but when the military neglects common courtesy, it's tough to see the sincerity in the so-called One Guam promise. Quote, One Guam was the promise by the U.S. military to be mindful of the civilian community's interest while moving on military missions to keep the world safer. We get it. Guam plays a role in balancing the security of the Indo-Pacific, especially in light of massive muscle flexing by China. But that doesn't mean the local community should be disregarded and relegated to being an afterthought when major decisions are made that will put foreign military personnel and aircraft on the island on a longer-term basis. Guam's civilian community has been a good neighbor to the military. The military owes it to its host community to be courteous and nice. Okay, so I hope by now everyone is familiar with what I'm talking about. But Singapore has an Air Force. Singapore's in a real hot spot between Indonesia, Malaysia, not far from that far from China. And it's certainly in Singapore's interest to have a solid defense capability given the neighborhood that it lives in. And since they're our allies, it helps us for them to have a good solid defense capability on one of the key sea lanes in the whole world, the Straits of Malacca. I don't know what the statistics are, but so much of the world's commerce sails through the Straits of Malacca past Singapore. So it's a good thing for us to have a good relationship with Singapore. Now, I can't get too excited about, common courtesy and being a good neighbor to the military. I think that there are more important issues here than this. I have an article from, I read the Straits Times article and one from the Star Online. Here are the things that trouble me. The permanent fighter training presence at Andersen will be the RSAF's 6th long-term unit overseas. So the word permanent is what's troublesome to me. The lead of the editorial, a detachment of the Singapore Air Force personnel and aircraft that need room for a permanent fighting training. So the way I read that, there's going to be a portion of Andersen Air Force Base that's Singapore Air Force. I don't know how big it's going to be. Is it going to be one building, a couple of tents, a modular house, or whatever? But the way the editorial reads, the way the Straits Times article reads, and the way the Star article reads, it appears that we're going to have foreign troops stationed here. Yeah, for permanent fighter training. A permanent fighter detachment will be stationed on Guam. And every country is sensitive to having foreign troops stationed on its own soil. You get into things like nationalism, sovereignty, etc. And of course, that's part of the problem between the United States and Japan. Japan has a huge number of American servicemen stationed in Japan. And this is, sort of a little bit of an impact on the Japanese assertion of sovereignty. Same thing happened when we had Clark and Subic in the Philippines. The nationalists in those two countries are not happy about having a foreign military base on their soil. So And I can't say that I'm really happy about it either. Being a minor study of American history, I'm unaware of the United States ever having a foreign military base on U.S. soil. Now, we train people from other countries all over the world. We put them up. As a matter of fact, I was fortunate enough to go to the residence phase of Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Missouri, as you were, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And in my 14-man section, we had an officer from the Army of Portugal and an officer from the Army of India. And that was kind of the design of the course, that every 14-man section had foreign officers. But if we're going to do it, it should not be a kind of, oh, by the way. We're going to have a permanent detachment of the Singapore Air Force located on American soil anywhere, whether it's Idaho, Arizona, Wisconsin, I don't care where it is, or Guam. It should be not be treated in an oh, by the way sort of way. It should be explained. And if it is not going to be permanent, if it's something other than that, I want my fears allayed. And that didn't happen. Second thing that I find wrong with this whole idea here is this, that the Joint Region Marianas had a really good story to tell here. If you have a really good story to tell, there's some things you need to do. You need to be first. You need to break your story before somebody else does. Because if you break the story yourself, you can frame the issue. If someone else breaks the story, that they can frame the issue. So there could have been a very well-framed story here, and that could have been something along the lines of our Secretary of Defense has entered into an agreement with the government of Singapore that will make us more secure here in the Indo-Pacific region and cement our good relationships with another democracy, Singapore. And it's going to even be a little bump for the economy, because we're going to have some people from Singapore come in here and spend some money. And here's what this is about. Singapore Air Force is going to do some training from Andersen Air Force Base. If they had done that and broke it that way in our newspaper, I would be sitting here saying, hey, good job, guys, right on. But to let the Straits Times break the story and not frame it in the most favorable light to our military establishment, I wouldn't call it public relations malpractice, but it's... You see this, guys, up there in Nimitz Hill? You're not going to get one of these. You're not going to get a blue star for that performance. It was not a good performance. And because of the way you broke the news, you're going to find yourself in a hole from time to time. If one of these Singaporean Air Force guys engages in the local road racing custom, that is to see if a late model car can beat a concrete utility pole in an off-road race, this is going to come back and bite you, and it's going to keep biting you because of the way you broke the story. So just not a very, very good way to do business, especially when we see that we're going to be entertaining 4,000 Marines in a few years, and that we have, the antis out there, the environmental wackos and the culture clique and all those folks who are looking for every possible reason to assert an anti-military rap, oftentimes wrapping it in a separatist rap. So not good at all. And of course, the Daily News is not going to give you any bad press at all on it. They won't give you any press at all, probably. So the kudos to the Post here. I think that the problem actually has a little different dimension than the one that they laid out. common courtesy, kind of like, before this happened, somebody should have called Lulian Guerrero and whispered in her ear, called Tina, or sent a polite note to Tina Rose Bunya Barnes. I don't know. I don't get too excited about that kind of stuff. But before I do the break here it is. One Post did it again.
Ever notice how that one perfect holiday gift is just out of reach? Or how sales on the stuff you want all come at the same time? This season, plan ahead with a holiday loan from First Hawaiian Bank. Now you can afford to be nice without being naughty. For more details, visit FHB.com or any branch to apply. Additional restrictions apply. First Hawaiian Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Rent, lease. What does Horizon do for you? Here's a clue. Advertising, marketing, screening, inspecting, instructing, leasing and signing, collecting and complying, inquiring and assessing, coordinating, repairing, renewing, enforcing, evicting, moving, cleaning, rekeying, communicating. Do it yourself and you'll find it taxing. We work hard to keep the vacancies low, so at the end of the month, you collect the dough. Proven and trusted. Horizon Properties. We do it all. 777-7792.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mescla. Try their featured special for December. Seafood Lao Lao, a medley of salmon, shrimp, scallops, and fresh spinach wrapped in tea leaves. Steamed to order, topped with soy butter sauce and your choice of starch. Visit Mescla in Agotnya and now in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Hey, Real Joe Cruz. Good call on that first bumper music as part of the First Hawaiian Bank commercial.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, Partridge in the 12 Days of Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, it serves as an intro to a Christmas special feature here on Tall Tales.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So get out your Christmas wrapping paper and wrap your Law and Order notebooks in it. Because... there you go. I've got a 12-day read here that talks about how the 12 days of Christmas run afoul. Deliberate play on words there. Run afoul of the law. So it's that time of the year when the world falls in love. Sadly, these days with the best deals on Amazon, but still there are traditions to be cherished. Mulled cider. Little white lights, caroling. Here at Find Law, which is an online legal resource, we have a minor tradition of exposing some of the very interesting legal issues that can crop up around holiday traditions. For instance, the Grinch, pointing out all the ways that the Green Gangsta broke the law is now a Find Law holiday tradition in its own right. In keeping with this new tradition, let us now examine the terrible, terrible ways the 12 days of Christmas gifts, partridge and all, run afoul, excuse the repeated pun, of modern law. General consensus says that the beloved carol is French in origin. Pierre, I'm sure, can set us straight on that. And probably dates to about 1780. Today, such gifting just wouldn't be possible without breaking not only some eggs, but local, state, and federal law. Nonsense, you say? Let's take a look. So you remember the song starts out like this. On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a partridge in a pear tree. We're off to a bad start here. let's say you live in the great state of California. Bringing in a pear tree is probably going to be an issue with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. If said pears on said tree originate from states east of and including North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and parts of Utah, you may only be able to import them with a certificate. You know, fruit flies and maggots and stuff like that, you know. So starting out the first day of Christmas, we may have to use an artificial pear tree instead of a real one. But I'll come back tomorrow. Let's see, tomorrow was 2 turtle doves. So we'll come back tomorrow to 2 turtle doves. And let's see, did you open the Tom line? Oh, we've got Andy on the line today, huh? Good afternoon, Andy.
Hey, thanks for taking this call. Bob, just very quickly, were you able to see some document that I provided to Ron Gibson? And this had to do with an article that dealt with the status that we're trying to get to, and it was supposed to be put up on a vote, but I haven't heard or seen anything of it until I read the document again, and it was, as I understand, it was mailed to every registered voter on Guam way back when, and I was just wondering if you had a copy or have seen a copy of it recently.
Well, tell me a little more about the document, Andy.
Okay, what this was about, 6-7 pages of print that of what's going on, what we were supposed to vote on, and a background and stuff. It was quite informative and pretty well done. And my understanding again was that it was mailed to all the election people and everyone that was able to vote in that election, and that was put in for review. But again, to the best of my knowledge, I've never heard hide nor hair of it ever since it got put out to the public.
Oh, would you mind sending it to me, Andy, and I'll see what I can do with it?
I gave a copy to, good grief, Gibson, and he has it, and I thought maybe you'd be interested in taking a look at it.
Well, I would be, so if you could email it to me, I'll take a look.
No, I can't. It's newspaper size, and I'd have no way to email it to you.
How did you give it to Ray?
Yes, sir, I did. Oh, when? I beg your pardon.
How?
Roughly about 4 or 5 days ago, roughly.
You gave him a hard copy then? Is that it?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't know what Ray wants to do. It's kind of up to Ray.
Okay. I just thought I haven't been able to get a hold of anybody except just for right now. I was listening in and I was able to get through to you. But I just thought I'd give you a heads up. If you want, I can get you a copy and leave it at the station for you.
Yeah, that'd be good if you could do that.
Sure.
Tell me why you're...
Or so, but I'd be happy to do it for you.
Tell me why you're so...
Hear you on the air again, and I've finally got out of a bit of a funk and was able to get this radio station so I can listen to it. So you're doing a great job as always, and thanks for letting me butt in.
Nothing will cure a funk quicker than a little bit of tall tales.
Amen. Okay. Thanks, Bob. Take care. God bless.
Thanks for calling, Andy. Okay, well, I'll be on the lookout for that. Okay, so let's see, we finished our first special feature, the 12 Days of Christmas, and now I go from there to the card. And this is what I've got on the card today, starting out with Bavakwa versus Fools, the Daily News versus Anti-Separatists, Landstrom versus Last. And it's going to be interesting to see who gets the last word on this one. Eric Santos versus Depcor, pot, marijuana, and cannabis versus traffic safety, and then some holdovers. U.S. versus China, the left versus the Salvation Army, and Antonio Garamchi versus Y'all. So let me start out with Bavakwa versus Fools. And this is was his column in the paper. I guess it must have been on Friday. I had it on Friday's card, so it must have been on Friday, and I didn't get to it. And this is the tagline: "Don't be fooled by hybrid decolonization options." Anytime there is a discussion on decolonization in Guam, there has to be mention of the three options that are currently mandated in Guam law to be on any plebiscite ballot: statehood, free association, and independence. Each of these options would push Guam to a higher and more stable level of self-government, either within the U.S. or in cooperation with the U.S. You know, you gotta really be careful when you read this stuff this guy puts out. Statehood would not be, if Guam were a state, this would not be in cooperation with the United States. This would be the United States. And of course, I've gone through the exercise of telling why there is no such thing as free association for the territory of Guam. It cannot happen. It's a will-o'-the-wisp, and it's part of a really interesting construct where two impossible options are contrasted with one that is legally possible, so that it's kind of like the old heads I win, tails you lose type of a game of flipping coins, or I'm putting these on sale. They're 2 for a nickel or 3 for a dime. So, you know, we're going to do self-determination, and you could pick any one of the three options. Of course, the only one that actually is pickable is independence, and that's why I have often referred to the so-called Commission on Decolonization as the Commission on Chamorro Independence. Bavakwa, and then, of course, these things are in Guam law, and the reason they're in Guam law is because the legislature put them there. There's not something that's divinely ordained that causes them to be there. He goes on to say, but on the edge of any conversation about decolonization, there is also a desire for more options, for some hybrid options, some way of finding middle ground between these. These fourth options take many different forms and sometimes really aren't options, but elements of options. Commonwealth is the most famous. Another is tribal recognition. Another variation is to simply pass a constitution for Guam as a territory and get it approved for Congress. Well, I have explained here that Commonwealth, as we advanced it in the 90s, is unincorporated territory. Unincorporated territory is a political status. Commonwealth, for us, is not. The word Commonwealth doesn't have much of a meaning within the United States. There's a Commonwealth of Virginia, a Commonwealth of Kentucky, Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. It's a hollow title. I've often explained it that with respect to, say, Puerto Rico or even Kentucky, you could call it a hippopotamus, and it doesn't matter. It's what it does that really counts. So I think Bavakwa is beating up a straw man here on this one. As far as tribal recognition, I've gone through that one many times too. That is not an option, not even close to an option. I always have to go back to the U.S. Constitution here, Article 1, Section 8, which outlines the powers of the United States government by telling you what the powers of the U.S. Congress are. And if you look at Article 1, Section 8, it starts out like this. The Congress shall have the power, and then there's a laundry list. And number 3 on the laundry list is to regulate commerce with the foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So the Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with the Indian tribes. Every Indian tribe that there ever was in existence on the day that that amendment was adopted. There are no new Indian tribes. So we can't say, well, you know, the people of Guam, the Chamorros, are indigenous and they're natives like the Native Americans, so maybe we could be recognized as a tribe. No, even if you could, it's a real blind alley, but you can't. So I suppose there are those that do trot these things out. Another variation is to simply pass a constitution for Guam as a territory and get it approved by the Congress. We should do that. No matter which way we want to go, we're going to have a constitution. Unless we're going to have an independent country that doesn't have a constitution, maybe our independent country would have Bavakwa I as king, who would rule under the divine right of kings and wouldn't need no stinking constitution. But even an independent Guam would need a constitution. If Guam were to become a statehood, the way the process works, a territory develops a constitution that's satisfactory to its own people, advances that constitution to a member of Congress who would then introduce an enabling act, and the enabling act, if adopted by the Congress, admits that territory to statehood. But absent a satisfactory constitution, no statehood. Since free association is impossible anyhow, no sense even talking about that. So adopting a constitution is a good deal all the way around. If we stayed as an unincorporated territory, it would give us more home rule, more self-government. And of course, that's exactly what Bavakwa doesn't want to see, because it's much easier to advance his arguments by using a kind of a poor me theory. You know, we can't do this and we can't do that, and we're being held hostage by Washington, and we don't have self-government. Of course, we do have self-government, and if we had our own constitution, if we adopted our own tax code, and if we went to the U.S. Congress and asked for some of the things that would make our territorial status more benevolent, we could have a pretty good setup here. But that would be the last thing that the separatists want to see. The separatists would like to see things. The separatists, I suspect, are sitting behind their drawing boards, drooling over the Singapore Air Force dimension being stationed on Anderson. That will be like candy for them. So that's what Bavakwa says to be on the lookout for. There can be strong feelings of pragmatism behind these alternative options. After all, independent statehood and free association can also feel so distant, so difficult, so final. Wouldn't it be better to seek one of the more middle-of-the-road options so that we don't end up down a path that is too drastic? A rhetorical question that he poses. I sometimes refer to these fourth kind of options as potential political status traps. Decolonization, in its most general sense, is about achieving a genuine level of self-governance. Now, when he says decolonization, he doesn't mean decolonization for the territory of Guam. He doesn't mean decolonization for the likes of me and other folks who he would label as settlers, because we had the misfortune of being born San Lago and moving to Guam later on. When he talks decolonization, he's talking only about decolonization of Chamorros. So you have to keep that in mind as he goes through this. He says decolonization, in the most general sense, is about achieving a genuine level of self-government. So in his world, Chamorros would have self-government. What happens to the rest of us? Who cares? Bucks next. Many countries still have colonies, for whatever reason, don't want to assist their possessions in meeting these criteria. And a lot of them don't want to be anything other than colonies. They ignore the issue, or they offer symbolic gestures, but clearly don't want to give up their colonizer status yet. Ooh, the colonizers. There are, as we can see in the world today, a wide variety of arrangements whereby a colonizer or administering power can call a place self-governing while still maintaining colonial control. For example, when looking at the United States, Puerto Rico is a, quote, commonwealth and isn't supposed to be a colony or non-self-governing territory anymore. In 1952, Puerto Rico was allowed to pass a constitution, and soon after, it was removed from the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories. It was considered to be decolonized by the United States. Well, there was a little bit more to it than that, more than just adopting a constitution. There was congressional enabling legislation, a part of which was allowing Puerto Rico to adopt its own constitution and establishing what the framers of that statute thought was a new political status outside the realm of Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution, the so-called territorial status. At the time that it happened, it may very well have been to get a court to rule that way. Wow, 10 minutes, 8 minutes to the big halftime show already. So take a short break. I'm going to come back to Bavacqua versus the Fools.
GRMC's Neuroscience and Neurology Department treats a wide spectrum of disorders associated with the nervous system, spine, and brain. Some of the more common disorders include seizures, epilepsy, dementia, sleep disorders, migraine, and stroke, which is one of the leading causes of death on Guam. GRMC's neuroscience team is equipped with the latest technology and the finest neurological doctors. To make an appointment, contact GRMC Specialty Clinics at 645-5500.
When's the last time you looked at your homeowner's insurance?
An easily overlooked part of covering our home is what's inside of it. Over time, we buy things we don't want to lose, but don't update our contents coverage. The smart thing to do is get the answers and level up our insurance to make sure we're totally protected.
That's the Insurance Extra Point. Get out there and make something good happen today by calling Guahan Insurance Services at 475-1162 or visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center in Tamuning.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Okay, so here we are. Going on with Bavacqua's column, but if you compare the status in Guam and Puerto Rico, their level of self-governments, and they are almost in the exact position with only a fancy title separating them. Even the fact that Puerto Rico has a constitution and Guam doesn't actually mean much. A federal court had ruled recently that Puerto Rico's constitution can't actually be considered one since its power doesn't stem from Puerto Rico or its people. A federal court called the United States Supreme Court, as a matter of fact. Two important cases were decided by the Supreme Court here within the last couple of years. One was a double jeopardy case, and I'll try to explain quickly. If you committed a crime in California, that had 5 elements. The state of California could prosecute you for that crime based on proving those 5 elements. The United States government, the United States attorney in the proper district could prosecute you for the same exact crime. And notwithstanding the double jeopardy clause of the United States Constitution, which reads, no person shall be held to answer for, let's see, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, the so-called double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment. But that clause of the Fifth Amendment doesn't apply when there's a prosecution by a state and by the United States. 2 different sovereigns, no double jeopardy. So the same issue arose in Puerto Rico, and the defendant in that case raised a double jeopardy argument, and he won. Because the Supreme Court said Puerto Rico is not a separate sovereign like the state of California or any of the 50 states. Its sovereignty, such as it has, is only derived from federal sovereignty. Court came down with a similar decision on PROMESA, the statute that allows the United States to go in and reform Puerto Rico's debt structure. So Bavacqua is correct here that Puerto Rico is, when you scrape the paint and varnish off of it, an unincorporated territory of the United States. And had we been successful in our efforts for Commonwealth, Guam would have been an unincorporated territory of the United States. Now, the trick here is to take the words unincorporated territory and make those sound just as bad as colonizer or colonialist, when the actual facts are being in an unincorporated territory has some really serious advantages. And notwithstanding all the propaganda about the racist nature of Downs versus Bidwell, which is kind of where the unincorporated territory status begins, it's not racist. It was based on whether or not the uniformity clause of Article 1 of the Constitution would apply in the Philippines as you were in Puerto Rico. It dealt with sugar or bananas, I don't remember which. But not having the uniformity clause apply here is a big advantage for us. If the uniformity clause applied here, no more duty-free shopping and no more Guam customs and quarantine. We wouldn't be doing that. And a lot of other things fall with it. So the idea here is to say to people, the status we have is awful. So we've got to change. And we've got these 3 possibilities that we could go to. One of them is impossible. The other one is practically impossible for the reasons I keep mentioning. You know, Guam, with 160,000 people, has little chance of becoming a state. Certainly not in my lifetime. Probably not even in yours, young blood there, your real Joe Cruz. It just isn't going to happen. So you got 2 impossible choices and independence. That's where being fooled comes in. So don't be fooled by the false choice. Okay, big halftime show coming up. We'll be back in 6 or 7 minutes after you've enjoyed the show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
It continues. I'm Paul Stevens, Fox News. The impeachment inquiry against President Trump resumes on Monday.
Committee Chair Jerry Nadler says Democrats have a rock-solid case that the president abused the power of his office for political gain, telling CNN's State of the Union.
I think the case we have, if presented to a jury, would be a guilty verdict in about 3 minutes flat.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz told NBC's Meet the Press the impeachment effort is going nowhere.
I think the American people know this is a waste of time.
The Judiciary Committee will hear evidence from Democrats and Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee. In Washington, Rachel Sutherland, Fox News.
At least one person dead, others missing and injured. This after a volcano on a small New Zealand island frequented by tourists erupted with a big plume of ash and steam on Monday. Dozens of tourists were on or near White Island when the volcano erupted. Scientists did note a quick recent uptick in volcanic activity, but tourists were still being allowed to visit. The FBI, meantime, still investigating possible motives for last week's deadly shooting at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida.
We are, as we do in most active shooter investigations, work with the presumption that this was an act of terrorism.
Special Agent in Charge Rachel Rojas from the FBI's Jacksonville field office. In addition,
we have all the resources here in place now in Pensacola, at Pensacola Naval Air Station. They are in place, and that the personnel that are there are working 24/7 shifts to do all the things that are done, investigations, to get them promptly addressed and resolved.
U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Florida, Larry Keefe. SpaceX making an early holiday delivery to the International Space Station on Sunday. The Dragon capsule arriving at the ISS, delivering many things, including some pest-killing worms, a smart, empathetic robot, and Christmas presents as well. America is listening to Fox News.
Did you know that home loan rates have plunged again? Would you like to take advantage of these lower rates to help lower your monthly payments? Refinancing doesn't have to be for another 30 years. It can be for 10, 15, or 20 years. It's up to you. Reduce your monthly payments. Pay off your loan earlier. At Bank Pacific, where we're open to closing your loan in a hurry.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender. Credit conditions apply.
We can't buy this house.
What?
It has 4 bathrooms. Just think of all the bathtub rings, water spots, and stains, plus the cleaning products I'll have to buy.
Didn't I tell you? The house comes with a non-electric Connecticut water treatment system. We'll have clean, soft water throughout the house, protect the water-using appliances, keep the tub, showers, and sinks looking like new, and help our skin, hair, and clothes look and feel great, too. The house even includes a Connecticut drinking water system.
A Connecticut system in the house? We'll take it.
American Water Tech, a passion for improving lives through better water.
One suspect under arrest facing a capital murder charge in connection with the killing of a police officer Saturday night in Houston. Arturo Solis charged with killing 32-year-old Sergeant Christopher Brewster. He was called to investigate a domestic incident. Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo.
And although he was mortally wounded, he had the presence of mind to draw his pistol out of his holster to protect himself in case a suspect came up. And he also had the presence of mind and that courage to put out and broadcast suspect information that was critical for the responding units.
Arturo Solis being held without bond. Indian fire officials finally able early Monday to douse a smoldering fire in a New Delhi building one day after a blaze there killed at least 43 people. The 4-story building housing illegal factories, officials say. That fire believed to have been caused by an electrical short circuit. Firefighters had to fight the blaze from about 100 yards away due to narrow alleyways and tangled electrical wire. Well, you can literally call this one a bill for the birds.
New York City lawmakers are poised to adopt legislation requiring bird-friendly glass on all new construction. The idea is to cut down on the tens of thousands of birds who die flying into the city's buildings every year. New York will be the largest city in the nation to require glass that's visible to birds if the measure passes. Groups that monitor bird populations say they're thrilled at the prospect of the legislation's approval in the Big Apple. Tom Rigotti, Fox News.
Nominations for the 77th annual Golden Globes due to be announced early Monday. Movies like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Marriage Story, and The Irishman all likely to have their names called multiple times. The Golden Globes airing live from Beverly Hills January 5th. Returning to host is Ricky Gervais. I'm Paul Stevens, and this is Fox News.
Hafa Day, Tritons. This is Chelsea Siniglis, president of the UOG Alumni Association. I made some of the best memories during my time as a Triton. Because of this, I have committed to giving back to the G is for Giving campaign, which will help student scholarships, programs, and activities. And I encourage you all to do the same. To make a tax-deductible donation, log on to give.uog.edu by December 31st or call 735-2957.
Viva UOG!
Are you ready for some football? The Ray Gibson Show has got your fix every day with the Points NFL Pick'em contest. Get the latest updates as we check out the past week's performance and break down the upcoming action. Get your game on by calling the hotline at 888-TALK or sound off on Facebook Live at thepoint.gu. League members get a chance to win some awesome weekly prizes with a shot for your choice of a new GTA phone. The NFL Pick'em contest is brought to you by Current Guam with special thanks to GTA. Talk Tells with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So here we are, another really exciting halftime show. That cannon fire always really turns me on. As during the halftime show, I had a chance to peek at some of the Facebook posts, and Ishmael Velez timed in on the Singapore dimension. And while it's fresh, I'm going to spend a little time with that, and then we'll go back to the card. Now, remember, my criticism involved this, not the fact that we've got to deal with Singapore, not the fact that we're going to help the Singapore Air Force train here, neither of those things. My quarrel was with GRMC, as you were with Joint Region Marianas, and the way they let somebody else break what should have been framed as really good news for us. The story broke in the Straits Times. It hasn't even been covered by local media. And none of our local government officials have had a chance to kvetch about not finding out about it yet. I suspect it'll come. So here's what Ishmael says. There's a treaty in place between the U.S. and Singapore. U.S. will fight alongside Singapore if it's attacked, and Singapore will do the same. Currently, there are 0 fighters on island, and their closest F-22 is thousands of miles away. With Guam hosting Singapore's Joint Strike Fighter means that now we would have aircraft to defend the island and could intercept in conjunction with the the THAAD missile defense. Not to mention hundreds of corporations have their headquarters in Singapore. This is a way to deter any assaults on Guam. And then he winds up by saying, way to look upon the negatives of Guam. Well, I agree with everything that Ishmael says, Ishmael Velez, and maybe we ought to put him up for a job with the Joint Region Marianas, because this is the kind of news that should have been broken here, and this is how we should have found out about it instead of having somebody read it to us from the Straits Times from Singapore. So thanks for chiming in, Ismail, and we appreciate your alertness and your willingness to jump in on this one. Okay, so we'll put Singapore aside for the moment. We determined that with Bavacqua versus the Fools, the fools are meant to be us. He wants to fool us into thinking that we have no choice but to abandon this horrible unincorporated status, unincorporated territorial status, and become the independent sovereign state of Guam. And the reason for that is because we have Chamorro self-determination is really important. And the way the game is set up, if it were to happen, it could only result in one particular status, which would be independence. I have maintained all along that I understand the independence argument. I don't agree with it. I see tremendous downside in an independent Guam. I am very much in favor of the situation that we have right now. I think it could be improved. And I explain my position by saying the United States became an imperial power certainly as early as 1898, maybe earlier than that. And as an imperial power, it took the Philippines and Puerto Rico. And lucky for us, in order to separate its empire, it also took Guam, which was not really an imperial prize, but something that made the Philippines a more viable place to go. So, I mean, to hang on to. So because of that, we wound up in the rather anomalous situation of being a possession of the United States, not even a territory, not even a colony, until 1950, when the Congress declared us a colony, called us a territory, and that's where we are now. So we're part of the American empire, part of the greatest empire the world has ever known or probably will ever know. I want to stay in the empire. I want to improve our situation in the empire. And if we're going to vote on anything, I would like to have people go to the polls and vote on this question. Should Guam separate from the United States and become an independent sovereign state? Yes or no? If that's on the ballot, I wouldn't care who voted. But until we answer that question, we're just engaged in mental masturbation here that's supposed to lead to only one result. Okay, so let's see. I've got our Carl on the line. Our Carl, I'm going to read a couple of Facebook posts here, and then I'm going to come back to you. So hang on. Let's see. I've got. I don't know who this is from. I wouldn't be surprised if Joint Marianas was caught on the back foot. Someone's PAO may be in trouble. Great idea, Bob. Ishmael would be a great asset to any organization. And then wake me up when you're done beating the decolonization issue again. I know who posted that one. That was, let's see. Chris chipped in with that statement. Wake me up when you're done beating the decolonization issue again. Well, I only beat it up because it's like Lazarus. It keeps coming back from the dead. So when it's no longer an issue, I won't have to talk about it anymore. Okay, so let's see what our Carl is going to contribute to the show today. Good afternoon, our Carl.
Hey, good afternoon, Bob. Yeah, this subject, although it keeps going around and around, it always gets my attention because so much is at stake. And I called up this morning on Ray about the same thing. My biggest concern on separating from America is that our most priceless asset that we have in our association with America is that Constitution. And the reason is because for thousands of years, over 4,000 years of recorded history and well beyond that, mankind was subject to conquests, invasions, mass slaughter, murder. There was no such thing as personal rights, personal freedoms. It didn't exist. The king or the invader or whoever it was, gave you certain rights, and that was that. If they gave you any rights, and they could just as easily execute you on a whim. And, with our present concern over corruption, what would happen if that connection to the Constitution, as well as federal laws punishing public corruption, were severed or cut away. To me, that would just unshackle the political class. And I'm not saying that about all of them, but whatever corrupt politicians are elected to office, they would be empowered because of the removal of those constraints in the Constitution and those federal laws. And some people might argue, well, we can just write that into our own Constitution. But that is completely different. It is tremendously hard to tinker with our personal rights and all those things written into the Constitution. It's virtually impossible. In contrast, how easy would it be for some demagogues to inflame the emotions of people locally and pressure changes to be done in the Constitution, including complete removal of a Constitution or writing laws that only protect a certain class of people and disenfranchise other classes. So that's my big concern, and you can tell me if I'm off base, but that really concerns me a great deal.
Well, I've often said, Carl, that one of the things that's really attractive about living on Guam is that we live under the rule of law. Sometimes we get a little bit upset with our legislature and our governor and our courts, et cetera, but it is a rule of law. And if we were to separate from the United States, if one looks at all of the former colonies that were cut loose after 1960, an awful lot of them didn't turn out very well at all. So I'm a conservative. Conservative means, one of the things a conservative means is that you conserve that which is good. So one of the things I want to conserve is our adherence to the rule of law, our devotion to the United States Constitution, and our good relationship with the rest of the country. So I think you're right on target, as usual, Carl.
Yeah, and I have a theory about why. I think it's a little more than a theory, based on the comments I've seen online and seen in the newspapers, that there's so much resistance to writing a constitution for Guam, which all 50 states have a constitution. There's nothing unique about that. That would just bring us further up. It would advance our, as you said, it would advance our ability to govern ourselves. But I believe that there's so much resistance to it among a small core of people that are running this effort to separate from America, because any constitution written now would have to be written within the constraints of the American Constitution, which includes our personal freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, etc. And I believe among certain people there's a deep desire to write a constitution without those pesky personal freedoms to bother with.
Well, you've heard me advance the term chamocracy, Carl. Chamocracy, a government of Chamorros, by Chamorros, for Chamorros. And obviously you wouldn't be able to write a constitution in an unincorporated territory along those lines.
Yeah, and I would benefit because I have Chamorro blood, but...
Well, maybe you don't have enough. Once you start down that road, Carl, it's hard to know where you're going to get, where you're going to wind up.
Yeah, but I'm concerned about people like my wife, who worked very hard for 30 years, contributed to Guam a tremendous deal. She was the hardest working person I ever met. And she would have no right to any expression regarding the future direction of Guam. And I just, I can't even imagine that. If she couldn't vote, then I wouldn't vote, as far as I'm concerned. And then there's my in-laws, hardworking, tremendously hardworking people, and I'm not against Chamorros. I'm just for everyone, that contributes to the forward movement of Guam. I think it's important that we all be counted in. Anyway, Bob, thank you for allowing me to weigh in. I sure appreciate it. I always appreciate your show. I always learn new things, and I'm just thankful Tall Tales is there to add some rational thought to the discussion on these various issues.
Well, thanks again, Carl. Thanks a lot for calling. Okay, so the next item on the card, we're timely, the Daily News versus anti-separatists. Now, my sense is, as I read the Daily News, that their editorial policy, such as they have one, is really pro-nationalist, pro-Bavacqua. Of course, he's a column, he writes once a week for them. And the Daily News constructional preference favors, some of the things I've seen, a half dozen people are out beside the road waving signs, and the way the Daily News writes it up, you would think there was a huge crowd. So I detect the anti-separatist bias in the Daily News. Maybe I'm just seeing something that's not there. But the latest example I would give you is this. I have a press release dated December 5 from the Micronesia Area Research Center, and it's advertising the 17th MARC Seminar Series. And what the MARC Seminar Series is, that they will have people come in and speak on interesting topics occasionally. Robert Underwood has done it a couple of times. We had a guy a couple of years ago who talked about DNA and Chamorros. So we've had some really interesting topics. If I can, I almost always go. So that's the context, that there's going to be the 17th installment in that series at the university. And the presenter is a certain Gerald San Augustine Paris, also known as Jerry Paris. And there's biographic information about Paris. The release tells you that the program will be, let's see, it's going to be tomorrow night, December 10, beginning at 6:30 in the College of Liberal Arts and Social Science Lecture Hall at the university. Jerry Paris, 6:30 tomorrow night, UOG Lecture Hall. And then it tells you a lot about Jerry Paris, all of his educational accomplishments, his family life, his work career, etc. So that's what's in the release. But here is the title of what Jerry Paris is going to talk about, and what appears in all caps centered at the top of the release. MARC Series 17th installment. Quote, "What price? The myth of independence." So the title of this talk tomorrow night is "What price? The myth of independence." Now, if that's all you knew about it, it doesn't sound like Gerald San Augustine Paris is going to be out there trying to beat Michael Bavacqua as, kind of a more nationalist than thou type speech. It sounds like Gerald S.A. Paris's speech is going to be anti-separatist, right? So I'm going to go. If you're there, we can shake and howdy. And because of the nature of the controversy, I suspect that the larger the turnout, the better for the anti-separatists. If only a handful of people turn up, well, then it would be easy for the separatists to say, Jerry Paris gave this talk at the university. Nobody cared. Nobody showed up. No big deal. Keep moving. There's nothing to see here. So the Daily News ran this article on the Jerry Paris talk tomorrow night called "What Price? The Myth of Independence." And here it is. And guess what the Daily News story says? It only gives the biographical information of Jerry Paris and the information about the when and where. But it does not tell you what Jerry Paris is going to be talking about. You read the whole article, and you finish it, and you say, oh, yeah, Jerry Paris, quite a guy. But I wonder what is he going to talk about? His grandmother's recipe for oatmeal cookies? Who he thinks is going to win the Super Bowl? What's his topic? So the Daily News left out the absolute important item in this story. The item that fits into what you would call the local conversation. Should Guam become independent? Should Guam not become independent? And the Daily News, you know, I've got my blue pencil here that I use for editing critiques. I suspect that the editor down there at the Daily News has some whitewash. And they just whitewashed the important part of this story right out of the story. Thanks again, Daily News. Anyhow, I'll be there tomorrow night, and I'll probably be able to come back and give something of a report of what I heard or what I didn't hear. Daily News. Okay, next item on the card is Landstrom versus Last. And of course, as I mentioned this earlier, it's going to be interesting to see who gets the last word here. So you may recall a couple days ago, a couple days ago, I had an article from the Post called, and the title of it was Doctor Calls for GMH Probe. And it ran on the card as Dr. Last versus Annie Berdalio, Jolene Uggan, and Larry Lizama. And the article was very critical of GMH operations and what it outlined as a way some doctors have found a way to make a lot of money off the Daily News, being on the hospital payroll and then billing their patients for work they do at the hospital at the same time. And Last was also very critical of Annie Berdalio and Jolene Uggan, who have taken over as directors of two new departments. And Last is unmerciful in his criticism there. He says funding for nurses' salaries can be found by cutting high-paid positions in administration. He said, pointing to the medical directors, you only need one. He said Uggan and Berdalio each are receiving $225,000 annually for essentially a part-time job. He also noted that Uggan receives additional compensation for other jobs. And at one time, she was also billing for procedures she did in the hospital. Last said, noting that the emergency room doctors do many procedures that we don't bill for because it's part of the job. He said the paying of doctors additional for what should be considered a part of the job goes back years. He pointed out Dr. Larry Lizama, who also served as a medical director. So Dr. Last is very critical of the hospital administration. He points out some ways that, some things that he says cost us way too much money because people are in effect being paid twice for doing the same work. He's unmerciful in his criticism of Annie Berdalio and Jolene Uggan. Okay. So in today's paper, we have a letter from another doctor. As we're not in today's paper, this is in the Post. Last article was in the... the last article was in... Both articles are in the Post. So we have an article in the Post today, and I've got to do a little straightening out here, first of all. This is from Dr. Jerome Landstrom. He's a very good surgeon. He's a hand surgeon. He's got a national reputation. Among other things, he ran for the legislature in 2002 and came within an ant's whisker of winning. So this is what he says. The Organic Act of Guam mandates that GMH will care for all patients regardless of ability to pay. Well, no. And you keep hearing that all the time. That the hospital has to take everybody, even if they can't pay. So I dug up an article that talks about that phenomenon. It's not as incisive as I'd like, but it says the historical rule for hospitals is that they must act reasonably in their decisions to treat patients. Hospitals must acknowledge that a common practice of providing treatment to all emergency patients creates among members of a community an expectation that care will be provided whenever a person seeks care in an unmistakable emergency. Seeking alternative care in a time-sensitive emergency situation could result in avoidable permanent injury or death. So it is not surprising that hospitals are held to a more flexible, reasonable duty standard in their admission of patients for treatment. So in the 80s, a lot of hospitals decided that they didn't want to comply with that standard of care. So they stopped admitting indigent patients to their emergency rooms. And this was called patient dumping. So Congress got in the act and passed a statute that probably falls on most hospitals because they take Medicare, Medicaid, federal aid, or something like that that brings them within the federal ambit. And it's called the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. I guess that's a subtle hint that I've got to take a break, huh, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
I got a couple firecrackers out in the car if you...
Sorry about that.
Okay, all right. I think the Real Joe Cruz wants me to take a break, so we'll be back in just a minute.
Hey, what's that?
A Subway Big Hot Pastrami?
My Big Hot Pastrami?
No, my Subway Big Hot Pastrami. Get your own.
Get your own Subway Big Hot Pastrami. Tender, juicy beef on freshly baked sunflower crunch bread, topped with pickles and mustard. Finish off your meal with all new seasoned potato wedges, baked to perfection right in the restaurant. Both available for a limited time only. Subway, make it what you want.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Talk Tells with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by American Water Tech, a passion for improving lives through better water.
Okay, the seventh inning stretch, Wrigley Field, center field bleachers, Chicago. Nice sunny day out there in Wrigley Field. Folks on either side of me are eating peanuts, popcorn, and Cracker Jacks. A guy down in front of me is indulging in an adult beverage. Great day to be at the ballpark. And, of course, you're living it vicariously right here on Tall Tales, our theater of the radio. So winding up here on EMTALA, that's a federal statute. EMTALA also holds that there is liability attaches if a patient is transferred out of the emergency room, if a patient who is not properly stabilized is transferred out of the emergency room. And that could be different kinds of liability. So Landstrom is close but no cigar. The Organic Act doesn't require that GMH will care for patients. There is a federal mechanism that makes it pretty hard to turn somebody away at the emergency room. So here's what the Organic Act does say, and we've talked about this before. At Section 29A of the Organic Act as enacted, which is now set forth at 48 United States Code 1421G, subsection A, public health services. Subject to the laws of Guam, the governor shall establish, maintain, and operate public health services in Guam, including hospitals, dispensaries, and quarantine stations at such places in Guam as may be necessary, and he shall promulgate quarantine and sanitary regulations for the protection of Guam against the importation and spread of disease. I wonder if Lou promulgated any dengue fever regulations. Anyhow, that's what the Organic Act says. Now, a little historical perspective. You got to remember that when the Organic Act was adopted in 1950, the island was under the control of a Navy officer, usually a Navy captain, who had the same responsibility, etc. So when the Navy government was succeeded by civilian government, the governor was appointed by the President of the United States. So the sense was that he probably ought to do the same things that the old naval government did, and I suspect that's the genesis of 1421G. Now, the Ninth Circuit has looked at this section in a case called Baldwin versus Berdalio and said that if we have a hospital, the governor has to be in control of it. But it also says we don't even need to have a hospital. Just if we do, the governor has to be in charge of it. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of the story here, but my sense is that the only way that we're going to fix our healthcare system is for someone else to take over the hospital, to buy it, to lease it, or to do something that will bring professional management to that hospital, which I'm going to submit, if we ever had it, I missed it. Okay, so laying the foundation here, we had the last article by Dr. Last, and then Dr. Landstrom starts out by saying something that's not correct. The Organic Act mandates that GMH will care for all patients regardless of ability to pay. Not so, but the point is correct. It would be very difficult to turn someone away because he couldn't pay if he had anything that appeared like a serious emergency. Now, if someone comes to the emergency room and says, I've got a sliver in my finger here, and I'd really like you to remove it, and a doctor looks at it in good faith says, this is not an emergency, then at least in theory, that person could be denied care. In other words, according to the statute here, we have to be dealing with something that, let me see what it says. When a person seeks care in an unmistakable emergency. So if someone with an unmistakable medical emergency arrives at GMH, he has to be treated. If not, yeah, maybe not. I suspect that we've got one of those everybody knows phenomena here where everybody knows that no matter who goes to the hospital, for what reason, they got to treat him. And I'm not sure that that's 100% correct. In dealing with an unmistakable emergency, yeah, it's correct. In other circumstances, maybe not. And then, of course, we always have the situation where doctors almost always deal from an abundance of caution. You look at something and you say, well, maybe it's an emergency. It doesn't look like it. I would say the odds are only 1 in 10 that it really is an emergency. Well, the average doctor is going to say, I'm not going to take that risk. I'm going to treat it like an emergency, even though it's not an unmistakable emergency. So the practical effect is that a lot of folks on the island wind up using the emergency room at GMH as their primary care physician. Junior's got a runny nose, let's take him up to the hospital. Not an emergency. something that a primary care physician to take care of, maybe even if it's a really, if it was as serious as what I was fighting the last couple of weeks, maybe an urgent care clinic or something like that. But be that as it may, we're in a situation where the emergency room is the functional equivalent of primary care physician for an awful lot of people who get medical care here on the island. Now, Landstrom, although he is saying the right thing, but for the wrong reason, takes the opposite view of Dr. Last. And he says this system of granting hideously lucrative physician service contracts and physician administrative positions to political cronies and friends doesn't add value to GMH. This activity has been hidden from the public for decades. So he's starting out sounding just like Dr. Last sounded. But then he goes on to say the increase in of taxes upon passage of Bill 248-34 has resulted in millions of dollars going to GMHA physicians through uncompetitive procurement, manipulation of physician on-call schedules so that some physicians can achieve overtime pay on top of ridiculously high salaries that are atypical for a community of our size. Manipulation of work schedules. Well, I want to work. I don't want to work until Friday because on Friday I'll have my 40 hours in, and then if I got to stay, I'll accrue overtime for that week. That sort of a thing. So Landstrom sounds like Last, but then he goes on to say this. This administration is in the process of achieving fiscal responsibility and stability. This activity has resulted in unfair criticism by a GMHA emergency room physician who financially benefited by the old entrenched system of no fiscal oversight. Wow. So who do you think that emergency room physician is that benefits from that system? I got a sneaking suspicion that it's Dr. Last. He says, this activity, that is trying to achieve fiscal responsibility, this activity has resulted in unfair criticism by a GMHA emergency room physician who financially benefited by the old entrenched system of no fiscal oversight. And then Landstrom goes on to say, this is now being upended by the leadership of Lillian Perez Posadas, Dr. Annie Bordallo, and the hospital board of trustees. So, what Landstrom is saying is you're criticizing the wrong people. You're criticizing the people that are trying to come in and clean this mess up. Bordallo, Perez Posadas, and the trustees. And then he says, so that the hospital can pay our hospital nurses more to attract and retain staff and to maintain hospital logistics to assure the best quality of care to the community. And he talks a little bit about GRMC, and his finale is talks about the anesthesia department at GMHA. If we used various kinds of professional personnel short of anesthetists, we could save a lot of money. And but he says it probably won't happen because the anesthesia department functioned autonomously from the GMHA administration without any fiscal oversight. And then he winds up by saying this. That is changing now, and instead of criticizing the current GMHA administration, they should be applauded in this effort to stabilize GMHA financially. So Dr. Landstrom is taking on Dr. Last, and I can't resist. I'm curious to see who's going to have the last word on this, but Last describes the problem. Landstrom comes back and says, yeah, that's what you were doing. And then Last criticized Berdallo and says she's part of the problem. And Landstrom comes back and says Berdallo is trying to fix it. So if we were to look at it through the lenses of Dr. Landstrom's eyes, we would see it perhaps in the same way that I talked about a little earlier about the anonymous letters. Did we get any anonymous letters about Tall Tales today, Real Joe?
No, sir.
Maybe we'll get one tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, you know, this thing about writing a letter that's critical of a director, not signing it and giving it to the media, a sure way to make that director's life more difficult than it ordinarily would be. If the stuff is true, fine. But if the purpose of the anonymous letter is only because the person who put it together and sent it out to the media has an axe to grind, it's not a good thing at all. And I wonder why the newspaper is giving so much credibility to something that someone can't even put his name to. But what Landstrom is doing is coming back and kind of pointing to this phenomenon that oftentimes the person who goes in to clean up an agency displeases those who are entrenched in the old system and perhaps profiting from it, and then saying, and those people would criticize the new leadership and find all kinds of reasons to be critical of them when their criticism is really pretextual. The purpose of the criticism is to bring down the new director so we could go back to the good old days. I don't know. All I know is what I've been able to find out in the papers and from these two letters. So it's going to be something very interesting to watch as time goes on. Okay, I've got next item on the calendar, on the card here. This is Eric Santos versus DEPCOR. And it's not too hard to see from the way the story is reported how it is that Eric Santos winds up on the fuzzy end of the lollipop with respect to DEPCOR. Department of Corrections officer Eric Santos is looking at his options after the Supreme Court upheld a 20-day suspension for off-duty conduct. Santos said he feels the department treated him unfairly in the adverse action process, which is why he pursued the appeal to the Superior Court and the Supreme Court. He said that it's unfair that he was originally given a 30-day suspension over his first infraction. He feels the adverse action was too strong. Santos was suspended over a verbal altercation while he was off duty. According to court documents, Santos used foul and abusive language that could have led to a fight. Now let's get out your Law and Order notebooks here, fans. Yeah. We talked the other day about exceptions to the freedom of speech. You know, that the Congress is not supposed to pass any law restricting freedom of speech, and that same law applies to all elements of government. But a law that said it is a criminal offense to holler fire in a theater would pass muster under the First Amendment. In other words, speech that creates a danger itself can be restricted without violating the First Amendment. Now, here's another important exception to the First Amendment. It's called fighting words. Saying something that under ordinary circumstances could cause someone to engage in fisticuffs with the utterer of the words. So restrictions on fighting words can pass First Amendment scrutiny. Okay, coming up on the home stretch here, so I'm going to come back after the call to the post at Churchill Downs. I'm going to be ready to fight with fighting words.
The holiday season is here, and it gives us pause to reflect on the abundance of 2019 and to express our gratitude for Guam, the island we call home, and to all Guamanians. Our team here at Security Title is proud of the work we do to support ourselves and our families, to serve and care for our customers, and to give back to our community. May this season of joy and the new year bring happiness, good health, and prosperity to you and yours. Merry Christmas from all of us at Security Title.
In life, we all have the ability to make a difference, to make an impact on someone's life. As we look around us, time never stops, but we are filled with endless moments of gratitude. The art of giving is incorporated in so many different ways. At Guam Gift Baskets, we want to be able to express your gratitude and love to those who you care about. Show your appreciation with a gift made with love this holiday season. Visit our website at guamgiftbaskets.com. See the smiles, touch their hearts, feel the experience.
So going back here to this item on the card, Eric Santos versus DebCorp, an employee can't be punished for his off-duty exercise of free speech. That could potentially violate the First Amendment. And we've been into that before. If the employee is speaking about a matter of public concern, he got pretty much a free hand. If he is speaking publicly about something that affects only him at the worksite, might have a problem. If an employee engages in conduct where he uses fighting words off-duty, might have a problem. And if he's in law enforcement, if he's a peace officer, even the more likely. So, but Santos said that he said it's unfair. He said he feels the department treated him unfairly. Now, of course, we know how a person feels is really, really important. Whether or not the Civil Service Commission, the Superior Court, and the Supreme Court did accurate fact-finding and applied the law to the fact, that's okay, but it's how Santos feels that is the real touchstone here. He was engaged for a verbal altercation where he used foul and abusive language that could have led to a fight. He was disciplined for engaging in a confrontation with members of the public and conduct toward a former girlfriend, which occurred off-duty, court documents state. Santos said his former girlfriend had issues during a custody battle and filed a protection order, which she later dropped. Court documents also confirm she withdrew her complaint. Santos said sometimes people get into heated arguments, but it shouldn't mean someone should be suspended from their job, especially if it was a first-time infraction. So it's kind of like every dog is entitled to one bite, right? Every public official is entitled to at least one heated public argument without having to fear discipline. And then he goes on to the argumentum et tu quoque. You still got your Law and Order notebooks out there, Real Joe Cruz? Argumentum et tu quoque, which means you do it too. So you're accusing me of sneaking into the cookie jar and taking cookies when nobody's looking. Well, I saw you go into the refrigerator and take a can of Diet Coke. So what I did is okay because you do it too. That's the argumentum et tu quoque. He said DOC officers, as you were Sometimes people get into heated arguments, but it shouldn't mean someone should be suspended from their job, especially if it was a first-time infraction. He said DOC officers who were on watch when prisoner escaped were given 5 to 10 day suspensions, and those infractions were worse. So I guess a suspension of 4 days might have been okay, because it's kind of like an index here that of misconduct. Santos said the punishment for his action was too harsh. He said he would have been fine with a reprimand, but a 30-day suspension was too much. He would have been okay if it had just been a reprimand. He could have accepted that. Now, what's wrong with that? I wonder which director of corrections that was. Santos challenged the adverse action, arguing DOA management failed to prove before the Civil Service Commission that his off-duty conduct was employment-related, and that the CSC erred in relying on certain documents and testimony, court documents state. Santos alleged that DOC management at the time was looking to get him fired. Wow. He appealed the suspension to the Civil Service Commission, which later decided the suspension was warranted, but lowered it to 20 days. Santos appealed the decision to the Superior Court and then the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld the adverse action, citing moral and ethical standards and conduct expected of peace officers on and off duty. Chief Justice Merriman and Justices Carbolito and Torres affirmed a final judgment of the Superior Court upholding the adverse action. Santos said his case before the Supreme Court may not have been argued the best way he wanted, and wants to see what he can do moving forward. He said he works very hard at DOC and takes his job seriously to ensure the community is safe. He said his case before the Supreme Court may not have been argued the best way he wanted, and wants to see what he can do moving forward. So one wonders what Mr. Santos is like on the job, given his final pronouncement on this. I would have accepted a suspension, and I don't think my case was argued right before the Supreme Court. So he's examining his options, and he wants to see what he can do moving forward. I'm not in a position where I could contact Mr. Santos, but Mr. Santos, if you're listening, here's what you could do when you're moving forward. Not get into public disputes with your girlfriend, not get into public arguments, and not using fighting words. That might be a good start. And then perhaps spending a little time wondering how important your feelings are with respect to the operation of the department that is your employer. How much should your employer concern itself with your feelings? Well, this Eric Santos. And let's see, I've got, boy, it's just about the end of the rainbow for today, isn't it, Real Joe Cruz?
Yeah, we got about 15 seconds left.
About 15 seconds. Okay, well, the next item on my calendar here is pot versus traffic safety.
Oh, I guess we're going to have to wait till tomorrow.
I know that's something that you're always very interested in, so I'm going to make you sweat it out.
I'll be here tomorrow for sure.
All right, pot versus traffic safety tomorrow. See you then.